Okay, we're just bringing Juan in. This is the first workshop that we're conducting for the IMPH, and we're doing this at the request of the class. We've gotten feedback from many of you that you have things you would like to learn about that are not incorporated in our regular curriculum, so we're trying to add or augment your education, okay? One of the things that I'm trying to do to establish as a pattern is that this is a time-efficient exercise. So I want us to be time limited. Our goal is to be done in an hour and a quarter, at the most an hour and a half, so that this doesn't go on and on. Today's topic is going to be getting a job, which is of interest to many of you, hopefully of interest to all of you, one way or another. So it's important that you get exposed to this. Our goal is not to be comprehensive and tell you about every job you might be able to get in public health or even global health, because there are too many and there isn't time to do that. So what you're going to be exposed to is a sample. Even though I love to have each of you introduce yourselves to our speakers, we don't have time to do that. Instead, I just sent them a chart which listed your name, what country you're from, what your profession is, and what your interests are. Each speaker will talk for about 10 minutes, and then we'll answer questions. If you have a question, then introduce yourself, okay? And that's at least a way for us to get a little character to who all of you are. We're going to start with Dorit Nitzan, whose absolute number one important issue is that she's married to Manfred. Okay, there are so many other things we could say, Dorit, but we'll start with that. She is Israeli, went to medical school in Israel, has spent quite a lot of time in the U.S., trained in pediatrics, nutrition, and gastroenterology. And much of that training was in New York at Columbia University. She got an MPH along that time. Came back to Israel, worked for many years in the Ministry of Health, then started working for WHO, her dream. And Dorit, I think you started in Africa, right? And then Serbia, where she was country head in Belgrade, Kiev, Ukraine, and now she's the Director of Emergency Preparedness for all of Europe, and she's stationed in Copenhagen. With that, Dorit, you're on for 10 minutes or so, okay?
Okay, I'm timing. Thank you, and it's a real pleasure to see you all again. And hello, Diane, and also, yeah, great to be with you all. So just we met and we spoke about WHO and who we are, but just to remind who we are, because as Richard said, this was my dream. And when I did my MPH along the residency and fellowship in New York, when I was exposed first to the public health and to the magnitude of the influence that you could do, that was my aim. And I didn't know how to pursue it, and started from one route, which is the most common route to get into WHO. And this is the route of being a government official. And so one of the routes that we see, many of my colleagues that started at higher level when they came into the organization, is that they started and built their career with some kind of NGO work in the field, then government, and then WHO. And this is a very important issue for us, because if you look at the highest grades positions, we ask between 10 to 15 years of national and international work in the field and in policy-making positions. And this something that each and every person can build over time, or you might decide to go first into the lower grades within WHO and build your career within the organization. And for that, it means that you have to step in as P1, which is the lowest professional level, and gradually build your career, but with a lot of compassion and love to what you do at that time, not to look at the future, but to take the time for the present. And that's something that I always tell those who join us in the beginning of their career. Be patient. If you push yourself too hard, you'll be kicked out in a minute. We like people that like their jobs, that enjoy the moment, that work with their heart, because we have our DNA. And our values, which are our DNA, are to first and foremost to be trusted to serve public health at all times. And if we are, people that are seeking really to serve for public health at all time, then your place is with us. And the second point in our DNA is that we are looking for professionals that are committed to excellence in health. People that keep their mind open. They don't come with the know-how. They're ready to learn with the member states, with the scientists, with the organizations, and to harness it all into, the wagon. But to do it in a very diplomatic and very gentle way. And for this, we have been criticized, by the way, now by Trump and others, because we are doing it gently, because we understand that by fighting and by contradicting and by pushing, at the end, the doors are closed. We are there for looking for persons of integrity and persons that come and tell us, I'm not good at this, I want to learn, or let me work with this one. And to be honest and to never pursue and do something that is not following our integrity and ethics. Very important for us. And of course, we are looking for collaborative colleagues and partners. So our colleagues are our family. And we want each and everyone to work in collaboration with everybody else and not to be part of my team, my things, because your team today will be others' team tomorrow. Because in our organization, we are moving around. We, as you see, even in my career in WHO, I moved around. And what was their team and my team one day becomes my team the other day. So we are all one. And of course, we are looking for people that are caring about people. And this is something important for us, because people who are caring for people and about people, these are the people that we are looking for. So why am I telling you these 5 DNA points? Is because through the selection process, we will look into those issues. So what we are doing first we get, we advertise positions. It's called the post vacancies. They are announced globally. We are there collecting hundreds and thousands of names on the intranet. Or you put it on the internet, but we receive it in a special program in our intranet. And you have to put your CV in accordance to the post description, to the specific post description. So you cannot have a generic CV there. It's not good. People do it, but it's not good, because a generic CV will not correspond to what we are looking at for that position. So you cannot apply for 10 positions at a time. You lose them all. This is my experience, so go one at a time. Look if you really fit for purpose. And if you do, then show it, highlight it, bring it out and make it clear that you are the right person for this job and why you are the right person for this job. And then you know what happened. While you do it, the computer does it automatically. And they kind of make these very, very long lists that you can imagine we receive from around the world. And they kind of put it in a smaller group, probably few hundreds at that point, where our human resources team is sitting on each and every case to see what, what we require. Are you okay? And then they read what you describe in your detailed, because for each of the issue that we are looking, we will look for exactly the sentences, and they will highlight it for us, for the professionals that come in at the third round. So the third round, we are sitting with those highlighted people, and we, the professionals, sit there and look at each and every one. We look at how you studied, what you studied, if we know that university, where you worked. We might contact your employees or professors. We might, it's not always, but if we have questions, we might do that. If you say, do not contact, bad. Sometimes people say, please avoid contacting, bad. We won't waste time on that person. We want to have the ability to really verify what's going on. And then when we get for about 70 people at that round, it goes to the second level of professionals. And this is the group that is going to be in your selection committee. The selection committee gathers with all those names and sits with each one and looking and trying to assess if that person would fit into that position, or maybe there are even other positions that person, because we always ask, are you ready to go for other positions? We might say, you know what, that person is best maybe to consider, we can put to the side. It's not perfect for this one. And then we end up at the end, hopefully it sometimes takes many, many meetings because we have to convince each other. And we don't know the names, by the way, by that time. We don't have names. We just have descriptions. So it's totally non-personalized. And we cannot, I cannot get a phone call, Dorit, I applied. So what? You apply. I cannot help you. And it's not ethical to do that. So at that point, we sit down and the next step, we reveal the names. And we look at the names of, probably it will be about 14 to 20 people. And we look at them. If we don't see anything that is kind of out, screaming that it's inappropriate, or something that we know that person applies for 1,000 jobs in the past years and, failed it all, or something that we can see in the history, everybody goes into the next step. And the next step could be, usually it's a presentation. No, first of all, it will be a written exam. Here it's a technical written exam where we ask specific questions in regards to the specific position. Here you have to learn. You have to learn and read a lot. It's not something that you can do just because you studied or because you had an experience somewhere. And people don't learn. They don't study for this exam. It's tough and you need to know, and people usually very surprised that they did not pass. At that time, usually we aim to have at least 3 that would pass it. Sometimes we are stuck with 1 and we start the whole process again because 1 is not enough for us. And that can be very long, and you can see sometimes posts are noticed and again and again and again, because we cannot really find the best person. And 1 person is not enough for us. We need to compete. But if we have more, we continue. And then usually it is with individual discussion, where part of it is a PowerPoint presentation where you get something just like you are in your position in this country and the situation is this and this, how you do. And here we would like to see how you integrate the data, how you present it, how your communication skills, how you can be clear and answer clearly questions and not just doing generic things. And you don't have to know the data and the specifics so well, but you need to present really well. Your slides need to be clear. Everything should be very nice. Then we go to the interview, personal interview, where our competencies are being tested. And these are the 5 DNA points I told you before, but we wrap it in leadership, communication, you know, different competencies. And that is the thing that many, many people failed. And I don't know if I have 2 more minutes. Do I have, Richard? Okay. Because this is the thing that most of the people in that super group fail. People, when we ask them, show us an example where you did not succeed in delivering your message. And many people said, oh, I don't have such example. Let me think. It's very hard for me to think. Not good. Everybody has failures. Everybody has challenges. Everybody knows. So you have to already come prepared for each of the competencies to have a story, real story that you took part in that shows your weaknesses and how you overcame them. Because what we want to see is that you are aware of your weaknesses, aware of the situations where you were and the challenges that you were faced with, but you came with a concrete plan that has shown all the 5 points of the DNA that I told you, okay? So we want to show that you trusted to serve the public health at all times, that you are a professional that is committed to excellence in health, you are a person of integrity, you are collaborative, and you are caring about people. And everything you do needs to show it. Every example, even if it is about working in a changing environment as a competency, or is it about a teamwork, or about communication. Everything you do, you have to show it. And as you see, I know it by heart, because these 5 things in DNA, everything I do, I have to make sure that I do that in the, you know, I use my DNA. So that's the process. Once you pass it, you get a notification. You have a very short time to say yes or no, because then we will go to the second in the group, and usually we try to do 3, you know, grade the first 3, and many times we end up with a 3rd, which it doesn't mean that it's not the good, but very close to the first one, and it could be very good. So that's the process, and there are other ways to get to us, and this is through internships. And after internship, we have what we call a grace period, where we are not allowed to recruit you to work. But after that, we do consultancies a lot with people to give them the experience and expertise. And this is another good thing, is to start with consultancies, and either with no remuneration, with no money, or with a P1 level. This is also very, very possible, and we do it once in a while. Now in the COVID, we do it a lot. COVID is a great opportunity to get to work with us at these consultancies, very low, but you will get inside. I can promise you, those who will do great will get a job in WHO.
That I have class right now.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Very good. Okay, thank you very much, Dorit. I'm going to entertain just 2 or 3 questions, if there are any from people. Anything? Dorit, how much do people get paid?
Well, it depends. We are paid by the grade, according to the grade, so P1, P2, P3. So we have grades for national officers, professional officers. We have grades for G staff, which are the admin officers, and we have grades for directors. And so what you would start usually would be P1 to P6. And I'm not sure about the basic payments, but the pay is changing according to the duty station. So the basic is the package, and we don't care if you are MD, a nurse, or journalist. Every P1, P2, P3, that's the grade. And on top of it, you're getting a post-adjustment according to this. So like in Denmark, since it's very costly, we get about 70%. In Serbia, it's about 20%. So, you know, so the money is different, but whoever gets into our place to work with us needs to be ready to be mobilized every 2 to 5 years. Cannot stay at one duty station.
Right. So by saying mobilized, you mean moving around. People
moving around.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Other questions for Dorit? She has to leave in a minute or two. Anything? Alix?
I have a question.
Adi
Go,
and
Adi.
then Alix. Okay. Adi first, then Alix.
How long does it take to get your level up from P1 to P2 or P3?
Depends. It's first of all, if you do good job, usually it's not before 2 years, not before. But it also depends on which job you are applying. So you have to apply. It's not, you are not getting automatically in everything in our organization. So every time I go from one position to, I apply and I go through the whole process that I just told you. So, and I do it. I mean, I have to do it, but now I know how to do it. So it's easier. But again, it's anonymous up to a certain point. So you have to, and this question, for example, is a question that would scare people, you know, because you come to do your job. If you find a better one, apply.
Okay, Alix, I think you're going to get the last question, and then we'll say goodbye. Dorit has to
No,
leave
it's
us.
okay. I told them 3:30, so it's
Okay, okay, fine. Alix, go ahead.
Thanks. I had read somewhere, I don't remember where, that the WHO was overwhelmingly doctors, medical doctors. Now we're all going to have MPH degrees, of course, but is this evolving? Like, are there multiple people or people with more diverse backgrounds?
Most of us are not medical doctors. Most of us are coming from the health field and health-related fields, which are very wide. I mean, even teachers, we look at them as health-related fields. My regional director, the previous one, Dr. Zuzana Jakob, her basic education, she was a teacher. And the current DG is not a medical doctor, is a microbiologist. It's not true. It's totally not true. So don't listen to those who tell you that.
Okay, clear. Thanks.
Okay, anybody else? We have had a number of our students or graduates working with WHO, and it's been very rewarding for them. Chris Ronson actually was working with Dorit, and Dorit convinced her to come and join us for a year, and then she went back. I think she's back with you, isn't she, Dorit? Well,
absolutely.
She's not in Copenhagen, she's in Serbia, I think, right?
Yes, but we bring her a lot to Copenhagen when we could. Now she's working from Belgrade. As many of us, many people work from home. Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions? All right, Dorit, thank you.
And may I just say that Daphna is on her way to us as well. And we are very much looking forward to have Daphna with us and excited. And please, if you are interested and ready to jump and be ready, just let me know.
You know, there's this story, a biblical story of Solomon and the two mothers and the baby in the middle. Well, that's where Daphna is right now. And we're all committed to not cutting her in half. So somehow or other, we're going to share her and get the good fortune of having Daphna working for both the program and WHO somehow. So we're excited.
Absolutely.
Good. Okay. I'm going to, Dorit, thank you so very much. This is great. And I'm going to go on to Chris Cook, who is, where are you? There you are, Chris. And I will introduce Chris by telling you that he is a former student of mine. and got his MPH in Ohio at Wright State University. I think it was around 2005. Is that right, Chris? Something like that. So that makes me feel really old, as it turns out, but I am pretty old, I guess. So that's 15 years ago. And I think you were in either the second or third class that we had in the MPH. I felt that it would really be important for you to understand about public health jobs in the US. Many of you are not US citizens, but I think it's important to hear it. And for those of you who are, it's all the more important. Chris will describe his work. He is working as a public official, and he is the health commissioner of Madison County, Ohio. And Chris, if you can take over from there and tell us what you want about the jobs, and also maybe just a little bit about the health department. You're on. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Schuster. It's going to be a tough act to follow, I think, on a scope level, following Dorit. And just to tell you, I think it'd probably be beneficial to start to tell you my personal path to where I got to now. So Dr. Schuster said, yes, I did graduate with my MPH from Wright State University here in Ohio. Prior to that, I also graduated from Wright State with an undergrad degree in environmental health sciences. So I started with public health from the beginning of my career, and after I finished my bachelor's degree, I became an intern at another county health department here in Ohio, Miami County. So I did a summer internship where I worked in environmental health, and I was the kid who got to run around and test public swimming pools. And I got a chance to set mosquito traps and collect mosquitoes and identify and submit them for testing for West Nile virus. So that was my first summer experience in public health. And it really laid a foundation for a lot of things, because as serving as an intern, I was actually then hired by the health department there in Miami County. So after I did that for a number of years, about 9 years, I became an emergency preparedness coordinator for the county. And then went on during the H1N1 pandemic, led the county's response, not only for vaccine distribution and deployment in the community, but then recovery efforts as well. So after spending 12 years in that local health department, I decided it was time for a little bit of a change, and I applied to become the health commissioner of that county, and I did that for a number of years in Miami County. And then I got even a little crazier. I decided to leave public health briefly and went into ambulatory care as the CEO of a federally qualified health center in West Central Ohio. It's called Rocking Horse Community Health Center. So we served about 12,000 patients who were underserved in the community from very diverse backgrounds. And that's the mission goal of federally qualified health centers, is to provide a place where people either have no insurance or need sponsored insurance to come and get medical care. So I did that for several years, and then I decided it was time to come back into public health. And so now I'm at my current position. I've been here as the health commissioner of Madison County for about 4 years. And like Dr. Schuster said, it's a public official position. It is an appointed position, not an elected position here in Ohio. And my county is very rural. We have a total of about 44,000 residents. Again, very rural, lots of farmland. But it's a very diverse population in the sense of needs in the community. And so, as most of you, I'm sure, have learned as you've gone through your MPH program, population health is viewing the entire population as your patient. And so, looking at the workforce over the last few years has been kind of interesting in the United States. If you look at what the staffing across public health in the United States has been, when we had the Great Recession, as we call it, in 2008 in the United States, public health staffing was decreased like many other sectors of the economy. And so we actually saw we've seen about a 16% decrease in the public health workforce at the local level in the United States. Now, there are about 3,000 county health departments, which, of course, I'm a little biased, I think is the boots on the ground public health delivery system here in the United States. But at the same time, we had this reduction of our workforce in the United States. The US population was increasing. So we had this 16% reduction in workforce, but we had an 8% increase in the population. So again, as many medical providers might say, is, well, we have more patients, but less doctors. And that's exactly what has gone on in the United States. Now, we are seeing an increase now. We're trending up. We kind of bottomed out in 2016. But over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen a trend grow back up. It's been increasing about 2 to 3% every year. We're still not at the level where we were prior to 2008, but we're increasing. So last year, actually, only about a quarter of the local health departments across the United States were experiencing any kind of a reduction in workforce. Obviously, 75% were either maintaining or expanding their workforce, which I think is very important. There's certain professions in the United States that are expanding, some that are kind of remaining pretty consistent. If you look across the entire spectrum of public health, people like registered nurses frankly, public health is not able to compete. It's a highly competitive environment for registered nurses in the United States, and most of those people go to hospitals because they can pay more. But public health is still a landing spot for many registered nurses or public health nurses in the United States. Two positions that have really kind of stayed consistent across the last decade in the United States have been epidemiologists and emergency preparedness coordinators. So those two positions, I think, again, if you look globally, are very valued, I think, in the public health world right now. Those EPIs, those disease detectives, whether they're employed at local, state, or federal level, or worldwide level at the WHO. Obviously, you think about funding and funding right now during our pandemic. They're rolling more funding out to public health, especially on the local level, but unfortunately it's a little laggy, it's a little behind. And so we'd love to see, funding for the workforce happen before there's a pandemic. That doesn't always happen. But now I think over the next few years, as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, I think you're going to see that swelling of the public health workforce happen once again here in the United States. So it had some really good advice given there by Dorit, talking about hiring process. I'll just add a few comments to what she's already said, but she gave some really good advice even here in the United States and on the local level, being my perspective. If you think about your CV or your resume, the shorter the better. She talked about looking at hundreds or thousands of these documents, and the shorter the better, or at least something you can grab somebody's attention with. She made a great point about making it customized to the job that you're applying for and not just a cookie cutter approach. I think it's something that can be very readable. And if you're not local, or if you're trying to get into a job that is not necessarily something you have that background or you worked in, you should explain why you're interested in that job or that location in your cover letter. I value that because sometimes I get people apply from all over the United States, and if I don't see some reason of explanation of why that they're interested in this position, I think they're just casting that net wide just to maybe land something. So I think there's a lot of value in explaining explicitly why you're interested in that job or that location. Thinking about the interview process, we do at least 2 interviews here on the local level in Ohio. The first interview really focuses on scenarios and skills. I like to get people talking as much as possible. When I do interviews, I try to talk the least amount as I possibly can, because I just want that person to talk, because you get this 1 or 2 hour snapshot of deciding whether or not someone's a good fit for not only your organization, but also I always flip it back and say, are they going to feel comfortable here and excel in their career starting or continuing with us? And so in that second piece of that interview process, if we like what we see the first time around, we bring them back for a second. We really try to look at personality. We do strengths assessments. We look at emotional intelligence. I find that to be very telling, because anytime I hire someone, I envision them potentially working in a leadership position someday in my organization, or fostering them to be able to move on to the next position of a leader, being a leader in another organization. So I always want to look for, not just the skills, but also their makeup, because you can teach skills a lot, but emotional intelligence and personality assessments, those come with the person, and those are a lot harder, to craft and to mold. But I do look for a multidisciplinary person. I look for someone who has diverse skills. I look for someone who is raw and trainable, who has very good communication skills. It's very important to me. That's, again, why I try to get people talking as much as possible, and I try to keep my mouth shut as much as possible when they're interviewing. I think there's a lot of value in internships and volunteer opportunities, so I do look for that, whether it's professional or personal. I'm very interested in that personal aspect of things too. So I really I made a couple of notes here of some of the foundational capabilities that I look for in someone, and I'm just going to go through these very quickly. I have 7 of them. The first one is assessment. Can someone intelligently problem solve? Can they do those epidemiologist type of jobs? Can they take numbers and apply a practical sense to them? Because while we do view public health as population, it still is individuals and understanding what motivates individuals to make healthy decisions. So I do look for that practical application of their assessment skills. I look for an all hazards approach. I look for ability to adapt and respond differently. While we've all planned for pandemics here in the United States, COVID-19 has presented some things that weren't in the playbook, so to speak. So I look for people who have that all hazards approach and are very adaptable and flexible. I mentioned communications. It's very important to me. I want to know that people can use plain language and understand that you don't have to sound bureaucratic to have someone believe what you're saying. I believe in using very plain language, because at the end of the day, if the public understands, that's the only thing that matters. It's not sounding smart. It's making sure that you can convey your message. So that's very important to me. I also believe very much in a policy understanding, understanding what goes into funding, and that it's more than just science. There's politics involved, and not every decision, unfortunately, is pure public health driven and science driven. There are confounding factors that you have to be able to deal with and roll with. And so 3 others that I have written down here are community partnerships, understanding how you can be a convener in the community in which you work in, how you can create partnerships, understanding that you are not alone and you don't drive the entire ship, that it is the sum of the parts that actually makes up public health. The 6th thing is leadership. I mentioned already, when I hire someone, I'm always looking as them, maybe they're my potential replacement someday when I retire. I hire people based on that. So as with anything, I want to look at people with all different levels of skills. They can be more of a leader than a manager, and that they can gain consensus when there's differing opinions, because in public health that happens a lot. And then finally, accountability. I look for someone who understands that just because the way things are laid out doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. I'm very interested in quality improvement in performance management systems, actually measuring some of the interventions that we're putting in place and deciding, okay, this is working great, or okay, it's not, we need to move on to something else. So that's very important in that accountability piece of not only people, but actually programs, making programs that we put in place and decisions accountable as well. So I think the only other thing I kind of want to mention today is I think about some of my most recent hires. So recently I hired a community health coordinator. It's a relatively new position in public health here in Ohio. And so this person actually, again, one of those people I hired as a potential leader, within about 6 months, I actually decided to expand that person's job responsibilities. So now they're my director of community health and accreditation. And accreditation is one of the opportunities I'll talk about here in a moment for public health in the United States. So again, I hired for someone who had raw talent and a little bit of local health experience, and they very quickly fulfilled every one of my expectations. The other person that I recently hired is an emergency preparedness coordinator, a role that's being very well used right now here in this pandemic. And this person that I hired to do that had a strong background in logistics and actually had served here in Ohio in the National Guard, and so had some experience that I thought was very unique and some leadership type experience. And so that has actually proven to be a strong skill that I'm glad I hired for here recently. So, I'll mention here too, some of the opportunities here. And again, I'm giving you much more of a local perspective here in Ohio in the United States. But I mentioned accreditation. Accreditation is something that across most of the United States is a voluntary activity for health departments. Here in Ohio, it is mandated for every local health department to become accredited. And so this gets to that piece of accountability. It puts in place things like quality improvement, performance management, community health assessments, and community health improvement plans. It actually holds public health accountable for what they're doing. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in the United States for people to have careers specifically in those measurable outcomes across the local level. Some of the other opportunities I see here in the United States are, again, I mentioned epidemiologists. Before the tragic events of September 2001 here in the United States, epidemiologists were kind of a bonus for local health departments. And now it's a staple, it's a standard. We wouldn't want to exist without dedicated disease detectives who provide that data so we can put programs and make policy decisions every single day. Another opportunity, again, is emergency preparedness. Again, I probably don't have to tell all of you how critical that is right now across the world for this pandemic that we're in. Another opportunity, I believe, in this, you might tip your head to the side and say, that's interesting, is information technology in public health. When everything started with this pandemic, a lot of locals across the United States struggled to find the best the IT solution that would work best for contact tracing and case management, because cases and contacts required continuous follow-up. And in public health, that's something that we haven't invested in a lot in the United States. So a lot of us, unfortunately, we're kind of scrambling to find the best system possible. And I think this isn't going to go away. So, being able to compare data from one jurisdiction or one state to another state, I think is incredibly valuable. And I know we're sitting here in 2020 and you're thinking, wow, that should already be in place. It's kind of fractured in the United States. And I think there's some opportunities going forward to put that IT infrastructure underneath and lift public health up here in the States. The other two areas I see as some potential growth here in the United States are, I mentioned federally qualified health centers. That's the safety net provider in the United States for medical care and ambulatory care. I think that public health has an opportunity to generate more partnerships with those organizations, because they are seeing some of the highest need people. And in public health, so many times we do spend a lot of time trying to bring that baseline of the population's health up to an acceptable level. And they're seeing those people on the one side of the spectrum where they're trying to solve the problems. In public health, we'd like to address their problems before they even become problems. So I think there's opportunities for partnerships with FQHCs, or those federally qualified health centers. And then finally, another partnership I think that we're going to see a lot more of is the private-public partnerships. So right now that's going on here in the United States as we're going through this pandemic, how businesses can help public health with things as simple as making personal protective equipment. We've seen car companies in the United States stop their production lines for producing vehicles, and they're making face shields and N95 masks. And that's those private-public partnerships, I think, that are going to drive us forward, not just through this pandemic, but for some possible outcomes that could benefit the population beyond pandemics. So I think, the one thing that you could step back and look at with this pandemic too, is another opportunity for public health or policy analysts. I think there's a lot of opportunities to look exactly how things are playing out right now from a policy perspective. Great example of that is before this pandemic, 55% of the people employed in the United States had paid time off. Now you think about what that impact has been through this pandemic when people have not been able to work or have been sick. not having access. 45% of the employed population in the United States hasn't had access to be able to take time off. So you've got people that are being laid off and furloughed because of an infectious disease. And so I think this time right now for looking at the decisions that are being made and looking at whole system policies, this is what I would call the golden goose. This is something that is going to give and give and give for some time, because we can see the impact of these policy decisions, especially going on in a pandemic right now. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for making recommendations to both local, state, and federal officials of how policies could have set us up a little bit better for a pandemic such as this. So I'm happy to stop for questions. I do want to, before I get to the questions, I want to give you two resources that look at workforce and trends here in the United States. The first one is called NACCHO. It's the National Association of City and County Health Officials. It's NACCHO.org. It's NACCHO.org. Also, there's the Trust for America's Health. They do an analysis of the workforce and funding behind public health. And that is simply, again, Trust for America's Health, TFAH.org. You can Google for either of those and get straight to their websites. I think they're great resources if you want to look at the workforce and how the things are being carried out as far as, not only financially, but also from a funding and workforce perspective here in the United States. So Dr. Schuster, I'll stop there and entertain questions at this point.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Chris. Questions? Just while you're pondering, just an observation, Chris, I was delighted to hear you talk about the importance of assessing personalities and the role of emotional intelligence and the perception that you're looking for people who are going to be future leaders. I'm saying that because I think 15 years ago, I was promoting that as I was teaching you, and all the students have been stuck listening to me talk about that. So it's great for me as a professor to look at one of my former students and hear him say the things that I would want him to say. So good work with that. Thank you. Okay, questions from anybody? Chris, how much do entry-level people get paid?
So, I think depending on what profession we're looking at, I did write it down a few numbers. And again, this is, more of an Ohio perspective that I can give you right now. If you look at epidemiologists, the average throughout Ohio for people with a couple years of experience are between $45,000 and $55,000 US dollars per year. For epidemiologists, emergency preparedness coordinators are on the range of about $40,000 to $47,000 per year. If you get into kind of the director level people who have your MPHs, directors of nursing, directors of environmental health, you're probably in that range. People in kind of the middle of their career between $52,000 and $67,000 a year. And I did a quick analysis of health commissioners, which is my position. In Ohio, I very much believe in comparing apples to apples. So besides Madison County, there are 9 other counties in Ohio that are within 10% of our population and are also rural. So if you look across all those 10 counties, the average years of experience for the health commissioner is roughly about 10. And the average salary is about $77,000 a year. Okay,
good. I have one more question, and then we need to move on to Diane, I think. My question is this: in hiring, how important is the MPH to your hiring decision?
It's important. That community health coordinator that I mentioned, again, not a director or supervisory level person. She had an MPH, a recent MPH grad from Ohio State University. And it was very important. And I can tell you the quality of candidates between people who have an MPH or even another master's degree like an MBA or a master's in public administration or that's not to say anything about people who have a graduate degree alone. I think it's incredibly important, and just the it depends on the program. Sometimes it does. I mean, obviously, I'm a little biased to Wright State's program. I think it did a very good job, not only myself, but some of my cohorts preparing us. I think it's incredibly important. I think it just produces a different quality level person. Besides all the emotional intelligence that I mentioned too, I think you produce someone with skills that are second to none in my experience.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Very good.
I have a question.
Katie, you get one question and then we're going to Diane. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Katie from New York City. Regarding the the community health coordinator positions and some of the other entry-level positions, what would you recommend for somebody like me? Because I kind of like doing this program, I thought I would be able to get my volunteer work done this year, but that can't really happen. So maybe some recommendations on what I can do afterwards in order to get one of these positions.
So Katie, right now, I'm not sure what the landscape is there in New York, but here in Ohio, there are currently a lot of opportunities for volunteer or paid contact tracers. I know in Ohio, the state of Ohio has just hired 150 contact tracers, very entry-level positions, but it's incredibly important. And I know local health departments too are hiring or looking for volunteers to do that contact tracing. So it does a couple of different things. It gets you in the door for public health, number one. Number two, it puts you really on the front lines of this pandemic and talking to people who are contacts of cases of COVID-19. So, I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind. This is a tough time, though, to get into those volunteer positions or even entry-level intern positions. Great example of that is I was set to hire an intern this summer to do West Nile virus surveillance. And that's not going to happen, unfortunately, this summer. So, you know, this is, I'm sorry to say, this is tough for you. It really is. But looking for some opportunities of how you can help specifically in this environment of this pandemic. Contact tracing, you know, if you can start looking around to see if there's opportunities. A lot of that can be done from home. I know that, again, you know, those are things where a lot of times you're sitting in front of a computer with a phone, you're calling these people, having the conversations with them. I think that is kind of a prime ground that I would kind of point you towards right now.
Yeah, Katie, actually, as you all know, I'm in Georgia right now, not in Israel. And there are postings for hundreds of positions in Georgia for contact tracing. So and it's not just a US phenomenon. And I don't think, you know, it's going to be international and it's not going to go away by September. Okay, so I think it is something, it is, as Chris said, it's a way to get in, way to get started. Okay, good. Chris, thank you.
One quick question, and it can be addressed, going forward too. About how long does the whole hiring process and application process usually take? We're, you know, in June here. And so just wondering how long that process is and, you know, looking and going for interviews and stuff.
Chris, go ahead.
I can give you a very, very short answer to that. I think in public health, we've worked to speed this up. Here in Ohio, you know, people make jokes about, you know, the slow, sluggish nature of government. I don't believe in that myself. And so I think that if you look at us as just one example, I think I can speak for the trend, at least in Ohio and across other areas of the United States. It's much faster than it used to be. There's less red tape or bureaucratic hoops that you have to jump through. So I would say from the date of posting, typically what I do is I want to collect about a week or a week and a half's worth of CVs or resumes. Then I schedule phone screens to get my field down to about 10 or 12 candidates, do first interviews, second interviews, and by the time, from the time frame of posting to making an offer to a candidate, it's usually no more than about 4 weeks.
Yeah, I think WHO is going to be a more complex process. But I'll mention this briefly, in the medical care systems, I think hiring will be more like a month. Yeah. And with that, I'm going to thank you, Chris, and I'm going to introduce Diane. And maybe she can tell us about hiring processes. She is going to talk about hiring processes in Israel. Diane is a former U.S., you're probably still a U.S. citizen, I suppose,
yeah.
right? From Chicago, not far from where I grew up. She moved to Israel many years ago and is a member of our faculty at the University of Haifa and has, I guess, an MPH. I don't really know. You'll have to tell us a little bit more. But she is the director of health education, health promotion for Clalit. And as all of you know, I think Clalit takes care of roughly 60% of the population of Israel. It's the health plan that provides comprehensive care. And with that, Diane, I'm going to turn it to you because you can tell them a little more about yourself and your career and working in Clalit, so forth. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. It's nice to meet you all. Is anybody in Israel? Any of you in Israel other than Daphna? Or is Daphna in Israel? Some of you are in Israel. Okay.
Diane, almost all but two are in Israel.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. I just was wondering what time zones you're in. Okay, thanks, Richard, for the introduction. Can you hear me? Oh, are you all here? Okay, great. So I really so enjoyed hearing our first two colleagues, how they presented. Mine will be a little bit different because Israel's a little bit different. But I will take their lead and tell you just really quickly about my journey because we don't have a lot of time and I really want to get to the practical issues, although, you know, everything around it is also sometimes interesting. Yes, born in Chicago, grew up in Chicago. I went to Tufts University for my BA. Just if any of you have ever thought about doing changes in career or majors, whatever, it doesn't happen in Israel, but in the States it does. And I thought I was going to be an anthropologist. I thought I was going to be an archaeologist. And I started studying, and that moved into anthropology. And in anthropology, I started getting interested in physical anthropology. And then I discovered that at Tufts University there's a community health program, and I really enjoyed that and taking a class or two. So I did just a really 180 degrees switch over. I did complete my BA with medical anthropology, but also community health, and with a community health degree. And I was already on the path for health promotion and public health, and that was 40 some years ago. So, but that's when I got, what to say, bit by the bug, you know, in Hebrew you can say that, you know, and I got stung, and since then it's been my passion. So I was really lucky because I had a great internship in public health in Boston while I was doing my studies, and that, you know, kind of set me on my path. I made Aliyah right after that, and you know, what really doesn't always happened in a good way. My resume was circulated in Israel, and I got 3 job offers, which was, you know, unusual, not what I'd expected. One of which was in the department that I now direct. So made Aliyah in 1981. And the next day I was working in this department, and since then I kind of moved up, but also moved out. And that is something that happens a lot in Israel. That's the Israel experience, that many of us have several hats. Sometimes they say they're helmets. And so and besides directing the Department of Health Education and Promotion, it's a national department, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the hiring aspects of these kinds of jobs. I'm also Associate Professor of Health Promotion of Public Health at the Haifa University School of Public Health. I was there from the get-go, you know, from the first day it opened. Orna and Baron Appa recruited me as close colleagues. I also founded the Israel Association for Health Education and Promotion. I am also the chair of the National Council on Health Promotion for the Ministry of Health. It's an advisory group, and we do a lot of work on policy. And I'm the Global Working Group chair for health literacy. There was a global working group, and so I founded that about 12 years ago, and I'm just about trying to hand it over to somebody else, but may remain in the leadership. So the reason I'm telling you all this is not just to take up your time, but it's to say that this happens a lot in Israel, which I don't think is really the experience you see in the States or other parts of the world. for better or for worse. Sometimes it's like, why are people doing different jobs? It's usually because in academia or in the public sector, if you want to strengthen your skills, if you want to broaden your perspectives, it often isn't just getting promoted, it's also going to the side and looking what you can do in parallel. So it's an unusual situation, but I think it's, in many ways, it's helped Israel at least kind of put itself on the map, because it allows people to contribute in different ways. And what I've liked for myself is that I'm able to kind of co-fertilize, if you would, it's a translation from Hebrew, but my practical work on the ground, as Chris said, you know, your boots on the ground, I like that expression, really supports the academic work we do. And academia is also supporting the scientific aspect of my policy work and my practical work. I direct a department of about 33 health promoters around the country. I'm also in charge of cultural appropriateness for my institution. Again, it's another hat that I wear because the Israel Ministry of Health kind of requires institutions to make sure that somebody is in charge of different things without adding a position. It could definitely be a full-time position, but it isn't. So these are the kinds of things that happen in Israel. So I think that kind of brings us to what Richard was looking for. If I talk to you about looking for a job in Israel, it might be that the kind of multitasking, versatility that also the other speakers spoke about. You know, Dorit mentioned it in her DNA aspect, and Chris also mentioned it. I think we see that as well. I can't say that there's one type of health, a public health position. I'm most familiar with health promotion and the kinds of things that are done in health promotion, but I come from from a public health background. What I didn't mention, thank you, Richard, for asking, I do have an MPH. I did that in parallel to my position. So again, it's not just having the multiple hats when you're working, it's also studying. Almost all of my students in Israel, and I also teach at the Tel Aviv University School of Public Health in the Faculty of Medicine. All of my students, both in Haifa and in Tel Aviv, are also working in professional positions. So they're doing their MPH in addition, and that's actually what I did many, many years ago as well. So my MPH is from Hebrew University, and also my PhD is from Hebrew University, the School of Public Health. And as I said, that's why I've been kind of double booking the things that I do, because I bring in the public health academia into my practical work, and then of course into the policy work. It's a very small country, so it doesn't work the way the WHO works, although I really envy what Dorit spoke about, and also what Chris spoke about as far as the way in which we recruit people. As Dorit mentioned, I was really interested to hear the process. I work very closely with WHO in the work I do in health literacy and health promotion. I wasn't aware of some of the things she mentioned, so that was really interesting for me. The anonymity, the fact that there's no names on the application process. In Israel, that doesn't happen. So at least not in the fields that I know. So let me kind of walk you through what I know. The funny thing is, and I apologize, I do recruiting. I myself really never applied for a position in Israel. So, I mean, maybe it's not fair that I'm talking to you about something that I myself haven't experienced, but I can't tell you what we're looking for and how it works. Mainly in the public sector. I'll start out by saying the public sector in Israel and the private sector are different as far as the way things are regulated. It could be that by law, some of the requirements in the public sector would really kind of be appropriate for the private sector as far as their liability. But in the public sector, it's usually very heavy regulated. So what I can give you is what I know what happens mainly in Clalit, and it's very regulated. As Richard said, we're not quite 60%. Thank you, Richard, for that, but it's 54% of the population. We are giving comprehensive health care, whether it's the public health aspects, the care, the early detection. It's a lot of responsibility. We're heavily regulated. And so as far as hiring and human resources aspects, we are as well. We're probably the biggest employer, the largest employer in Israel other than the Army, for over 45,000 employees, and just dozens and dozens of positions. So I can't really speak for all the positions, but all of them are regulated in some way or the other. So, if, the way in which if you're interested in Israel, if you're interested in kind of the Israel experience, depending upon what position you're going to look for, there'll be different requirements, of course, and maybe different regulation. So I'm just going to go so can I just check with you to see if you're hearing me? I want to make sure. It's okay. I hear some headset. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
If I'm going too fast,
Yeah.
or if I'm if I'm not understood in any way, if I'm
Like you're doing just
slurring or
fine.
whatever, just stop me and I'll back up. Whatever. So everything that Dorit said and also Chris mentioned, I think are appropriate for almost everything that you would apply for in the jobs that I know about in Israel, and that's your CV. It's really important. I know. I'm going to give you a tip that I've learned over the years. I wasn't very good at it in the beginning, but the past few years, even though I'm not applying for jobs, I hope I don't have to, I've learned to do. And that is try to keep your CV updated. And I know it sounds kind of tedious and kind of boring in a way that, you know what you do. Why do you have to put it on paper? And it seems to me that I'm talking to a kind of young population here. I can see from your faces. So, and it's just kind of something that you might not want to do, but just do it because anything you experience, even any practical experience you're getting right now while you're studying your MPH, a project that you've done or whatever, keep a list of it. Keep like a master CV going. And then you can weed it down and you can adjust it, like Chris said and Dorit said, according to the jobs you're going to apply for. But have it all there because we forget. We forget about a project we've done. We forget maybe about some research we helped with, maybe a conference we participated in, whatever. Sometimes we just forget because it's just part of what we do. But try to keep a list of it. Try to ask yourself every so often. Every month, ask yourself, what did I just do that might be interesting for somebody if I ever get a job, if I ever apply for a job? And you don't have to use it. You can always, pick, cut and paste depending upon what job you're looking for. It took me years to learn that. I would have to, if I was asked to give a CV for a conference or for some research project, I had to go back and remember things that I did, over the past year or so. It's just not the right thing to do for yourself. Sorry about the sirens. My office is near Haifa Hospital, so welcome to Tel Aviv. So firstly, that's just a tip I'd like to give you. And you got to keep yourself disciplined about that, but I would suggest that. So usually jobs in the public sector are publicized, as it was mentioned by our other colleagues. Almost all of the positions are publicized if they're from a certain level and beyond. Some of the some very local positions, if there's somebody in place they know, it usually can be done with some consensus with a workers committee. But in general, most jobs are supposed to be publicized and with a job description and the necessary qualifications. And so that's kind of like a tender, like you call it maybe a tender in English. And the qualifications really for what, usually what will be publicized is the education, the academic education that's required, any experience that's necessary, maybe a certain amount of years experience. And some of the jobs need licensure. I think it's going to be, physician, nurse, whatever. Of course, they're going to be licensed. The work that we do in health promotion, there isn't a license. And a lot of the jobs in public health don't have a license. So the credential is having maybe an MPH degree and maybe having experience. So those are really important to keep track of. And so what will happen, and as I said, I'm very envious of the way the WHO mentioned that they begin, they get thousands of applications and then they weed it down to hundreds, and not until it's kind of a select group is the anonymity removed. But that doesn't happen here. So in many ways you would say, oh, it's such a small country, people know each other. Well, that's just the way it is, and it could work to an advantage, it could work to disadvantage. We try to keep as much integrity as possible, and that's why there's very strict regulation about publicizing the requirements, whether qualifications for education and for experience. And that, you know, even if you know someone or don't know someone, that's supposed to be objective. So those are things to look for. And then once there is an application, and I know in Klalit, and I assume it's in the other institutions as well, there's a selection committee that goes through all the applications. There's usually given about a month, not much more, to apply. It's not Israel doesn't open up a process of saying you have 6 months to apply. It's usually a position that they want to fill as soon as possible. Oftentimes, until the position is vacant, they don't publicize. Sometimes they're well planned, and they do. I don't think there's any one size fits all for that in Israel. Even though it's a small country, and you'd think we could have some homogeneity, it doesn't really happen. So I'm going to quickly just walk you through some of the steps that I know and I see that happens in many of our institutions. So there's first to just go through the CVs, the resumes that are sent, just to see that their qualifications have been met, and somebody who's applying can go forward in the process. And actually, the professionals in that field don't go through those CVs. It's usually people from human resources and maybe somebody from the workers committee. In most institutions, the workers committee usually have lots of authority and it's usually authority that's regulated so that they can sit in and they have a voice in every step of the way. So they will vet the first submissions, and anybody who isn't qualified, then they'll put to the side. Once people are qualified, then they go through a test for their aptitude. It's not a test like Dorit mentioned about knowledge, which is really interesting. I was very listening to what she was mentioning. We don't do that. We just assume that if somebody has the academic qualifications and the experience, if they don't have the exact set, the knowledge, the complete range of knowledge, maybe they can learn, but it's good that they do that. And I think they can in WHO because they have so many applications, they can vet that. So the candidates that make it through the first cut will be asked to go to an institute in Israel. There's different institutes that test people for their aptitude. And I think that's what Chris was mentioning as well. And it depends upon, and they look at the skill sets, and it depends upon what the skills are needed for that position. And for example, the positions that I hire for, I've described what the skill sets are. And then when they go to these institutions, they test for them. These are professionals who know how to test for human resources, whether we're looking for leadership or teamwork, or we're looking for good communicators, or if it's a job that I need someone to be independent for, they'll see if they can be independent. So it just depends upon what the job skill set is, and they will be able to give us a score. So we get a whole report back from whoever's been going through that process, and they give a recommendation whether this person fits or doesn't fit the position. Now that is not to say that that's what's going to determine, but that information is brought to the committee that does the selection. And so the next step, it's just pretty quick. I mean, with the next stage is as a selection committee, and that's a committee that will, call people in who are the candidates, interview them. There'll be discussion about them after they're in the interview, and it's usually all the interviews are done within one day. Usually there aren't that many people that make the final cut. So, 4 or 5 people will go through a whole day of interviews, and usually a decision's made pretty quickly. Those who are sitting in the selection committee are not just professionals from that field. There'll be people from human resources. There'll be people from the workers committee as well. And we don't necessarily have a worker committee for every profession. So, if it's a doctor or a nurse and it's a position for a doctor and nurses, there's workers committee for them as well. But often it's kind of a generic workers committee for the institution. So, so the decisions are made pretty quickly, and so it's usually isn't a conflict. We get to consensus. If there isn't a consensus, there's a vote. And we usually have 5 people in the committee. So there, there's no tie. There's politics, as was mentioned before. So usually we try to not allow any of the politics to enter. Sometimes it is, and we have to deal with it. So that's pretty much the way in which things run for most of the professions that I know in Israel. Oftentimes the professional association will also sit in. Sometimes, for example, if it's something having to do with a medical doctor, then usually the Israel Medical Association may have a say in who's selected as well. So, so it can get a little bit complicated, but it's usually a process that's supposed to keep it as objective as possible, even though it's not anonymous. And then usually what happens is sometimes there's a training period, sometimes there isn't. But when I ask myself what I'm looking for in my department, and I think many other people who are in this kind of position also would say, when it's all said and done, who could you trust to do the best possible job, the best professional job? And when I'm hiring also on a national level, I try to ask myself, who would I feel comfortable with in time replacing me at a meeting if I can't go to a meeting? Who is that person who's got the know-how, who's got the skill level, who's got the sensitivity? Chris mentioned the emotional intelligence. It's so important what we do, because we want to prevent conflicts as much as possible. We want to reach consensus. In health promotion, one of our basic values is, cooperation. I don't know, and I'm sorry I didn't ask Richard first beforehand if you have taken a class in health promotion, but if you have, and if you haven't, we have like a whole set of values that we look for. And, I would ask myself, and when it's all said and done, how would I feel about that person? Just kind of, replacing me in a time that when I can't attend a meeting or be part of a project, can they step in for me? And then, I get a sense of the quality of the person, of their, excellence, of their understanding, of their motivation, and of their passion for what they do. So that's kind of on a personal level what I look for. But as I said, the objective processes that are in place are really there so that we're just not being, just to make sure we're not being subjective, to make sure that everybody's given the best chance that they can for getting that position that they're looking for. So so I guess that's, this has gone on too long. I talked too much, and so I just want to wrap up. Of course, any questions that you have, I may not have the answers, but I will get back to you with the answers. As I said, it's Israel is a small country, and Clalit is the second largest non-governmental health service organization in the world, but it's still a small country. So, I can only share the experience that I know of here. But I'm just so happy to hear about the WHO experience. I work with them a lot, and I never knew how they hire. So it's just really interesting for me to be part of this workshop as well.
That's great, Diane, and thank you very much. And interesting seeing the similarities and the differences in hiring. We've got time for just a couple questions. Diane, I'll just start by asking, what do entry-level people get paid?
It's a painful question. Well, it's a painful answer. Israel's salaries are really low. So if I'm not mistaken, I haven't gotten updated lately, but in general, we would say that the salaries in Israel are about 1/3 of a comparable position in the States, or maybe Europe, I'm not sure. So it's just really low. But it's what it is in Israel for, it doesn't pay your rent in Tel Aviv because it's one of the highest rent places. But if you're, if you got your rent paid at all, you're in better shape. I would say, entry level, it might be something like 15,000 shekel. And so, you know what that means as far, by month, by the way, for a month. That would include some travel expenses. The funny thing about a salary in Israel, it might be the same with Chris in the States, and it might be in the WHO, and it might be in your organization. So your pay slip is contain so many different types of different aspects of your salary. You know, there's just different ways in which your salary can climb or doesn't. If you get extra hours, you know, paid extra hours, if it's a global amount of money, or if you have to report extra hours that you and so, but I would say that's kind of like a rule of thumb, as we would say, about 15,000. It doesn't. You don't really get promoted that quickly. It might be every 2 years. If you haven't reached the ceiling, you know, of your salary, which you could very quickly in Israel, unless you get promoted to a different level, it would be like every 2 years you could get a salary increase. One way that you do increase your salary here is doing continuing education points. And you know, the workers union has really taken care of that in a good way, at least for people who are academic, who have a social sciences background. That if you do about 400 hours within 5 years, you can, you know, get a promotion in your salary. And so that it's very complicated. I wish it was straightforward, but it isn't. And salaries are low, unfortunately.
Okay, good.
But that is not to discourage you.
No, it's just, but they need to know the reality.
No, it's the reality.
Diane, I have a question. 15,000 shekels entry level for which position exactly?
Well, this would be for a position that is, it would be like a social science, like a health promotion. In health promotion, you don't have to be a physician, you don't have to be a nurse. You're on what's called like a social sciences pay scale. So if you come through a pay scale that you're a nurse or a doctor, most of the health professions other than that really don't have a higher pay scale, but that would be more or less, you know, if you're a lawyer, you're working in a legal department, you might get something that is more comparable to the private sector. But if you worked in Israel's legal department, but if you're, that what I mentioned would be if you're working like for our department, health promotion, or if you, and we require a master's degree. I do require a master's degree to work here, and our job descriptions have say you need to have an MPH and you have to have a major in health promotion. That would be to work in the health promotion department. But and if someone has MPH but has done work in health promotion, that's also to advantage. So that's that kind of job. And again, we're not the central part of the healthcare system. Health promoters, I think, are probably most important, of course, and I'm not objective, but we don't have those high salaries. So if you're a doctor or if you're a hospital nurse, you'd be getting a much higher salary as entry level. And I don't know what that is, but I could find out.
Okay, one more question?
Yeah.
Okay. Alex, and then we'll move on. Good.
Yeah, I think I know the answer, but just to check. Obviously, it's important to speak Hebrew if you want to work for Clalit, but not hypothetically, if you can communicate in Hebrew but aren't yet fluent, to what extent do you think that's feasible, and do you think it's important to have your CV in Hebrew, or could you submit it in English?
Okay, great questions. They're really relevant, and I've grappled with these before. Firstly, I would say that maybe I'll just add something really quickly. I also run the practicum for health promotion in Haifa University of Haifa, and also the practicum in Tel Aviv University. So we also have projects in the different health service institutions, whether it's the School of Health, whether it's the Ministry of Health, whether it's NGOs like the Israel Association, Israel Cancer Association, the ministries. We run projects in health promotion, and students are invited to do their practicum there. And getting a practicum is also really gives you much more of experience, and also gives you, I would say, an advantage when you're applying for a job in health promotion anywhere in Israel, whether it's an NGO. I also think if you're going to go to WHO or the European Commission or ministries abroad, if you have that experience. And I see we have Taiwanese colleagues here. If any of you want to get any networking in any of these countries that I've seen you come from. I have colleagues in health promotion in all of your countries, even in Mexico and in Belgium and Argentina and Taiwan, so, and India. I know these are big countries, but if you have to be in a city where I know people, I'm happy to help network. But to go back to your great question, it is a tremendous advantage because health promotion is all about communication. But it depends upon what in health promotion. If we're doing cultural appropriateness and you're coming from a culture or coming from a background that has one of the major languages in Israel, that's helpful. If you're also willing to do some background work, maybe not field work in the beginning, that's also helpful. I have some research projects or money that we've gotten from European Commission where I'm also actually looking for people who have good English skills because we have to do a lot of reports and we have to stay in contact with colleagues abroad. So I've been really fortunate. I happen to have some bilingual people in my Canadian Israelis and you know, that kind of people. In my department, it's a real advantage. So Hebrew is definitely an advantage for, in the end, getting into a position. But if you want to do some internship work or kind of get your feet wet and do some work and just to get to know the organization, get to know the field, you know, we can work out something. But in the end, it's really important to do Hebrew, to have Hebrew. I did it. You know, I came not knowing Hebrew very much. I had Hebrew school as a child, but I was really lucky because in this department in 1981, I had a great group of people and all they did was speak to me in Hebrew and they pulled me in and, you know, you just learn as quickly as you can. So I wouldn't discourage you for applying if you don't know Hebrew, but you would be expected to know Hebrew. And I still make mistakes writing Hebrew. It's okay. But, you know, I made Aliyah when I was 23. So, but yeah, you would want to get your Hebrew skills going at least. You know, go to Opan, get it, you know, sharpen them as much as possible.
Good. Okay. Well, Diane, thank you so very much. Your information is very valuable and really complements what the other speakers have said. So very much appreciated.
Well, thank you. It's great to meet you. I congratulate you for going to the international program. And I really hope to meet you all face to face at some point and hope to maybe even have a discussion with you about jobs in Israel face to face.
Excellent. Thank you, Diane. Good. Okay, I'm going to take just a few minutes and I'm going to talk about jobs in the medical care system. And I'm going to try to finish us up pretty fast. In the Global Health Systems course, I'm going to differentiate public health, the public health system and the medical care system. And my point with today and what I'm going to say to you in the summer is by talking about the medical care system, I'm talking about taking care of people who are already sick or ill or are patients. People who enter the world of medicine versus prevention and public health, which is population-based and prevention-oriented. As is a complaint of mine, a huge amount of energy and a great deal of money goes into taking care of people who are already sick. And certainly more money should be spent, as far as I'm concerned, in prevention and in public health. But as it relates to jobs, because there's so much more money in the medical care system than there is in the public health system, there are a lot more jobs in the medical care system. And those jobs tend to pay better than they do in the public health system. So I've sent you notes. I just sent them out right before we started. And as a consequence of that, I'm not going to go through the whole list, or if I do, it'll be really quick. But the first point to make is, as far as what types of jobs, the institutions that will hire you are all the medical care system. So it can be hospitals, it can be health systems. And in different countries, those health systems are owned by government, like let's say in France or in Sweden, or they may be private, like Kaiser is in the United States, or they may be what I think in Europe would be called sick funds, and Clalit would be called a sick fund. and we'll talk about that.
Or
So,
HMO.
or
It's comparable to
HMO, that's
HMO.
correct.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yep. You can get jobs in clinics, big clinics or small clinics. It could be a private doctor's office, a group of people, or a large clinic site. In many countries, there are health insurance companies. Again, in Israel, Clalit serves that purpose as an HMO. In other countries, many other countries, there are separate organizations, institutions that just handle the insurance function. They're very interested in people with an MPH because they need population-based data and they need policy analysis. And there are a lot of jobs and they tend to pay quite well. You may not want to work for an insurance company because you may not believe that they're agents of helping people, but there are jobs. And then in the sort of newest stuff, medical device companies, IT, as Chris Cook talked about, IT has been in healthcare for probably, really seriously, for probably 20 years. It still isn't used particularly well, and there's huge opportunity to make it better. So healthcare IT, and that includes a lot of startups. And if you, you're in Israel, where you're in this so-called startup nation, there are jobs all over the place if you're willing to take the chance of working for a startup company. Usually that means making very, very little money and having a big risk of either getting nothing or getting a lot. Okay, I want to talk, so that's, those are the organizations in healthcare. I want to just take a minute and talk about what's important in a resume. But before I do that, I want to explain that people talk about resumes and they talk about CVs. And the two of them are not really identical. And I'm going to give you an informal explanation as to my perception of the two, but you may want to look it up, because if a job says send your resume, don't send a CV. If your job says send a CV, don't send a resume. A resume is a more descriptive document that really tells about your career, what you've done. So versus a CV, CVs are more academic. So a CV will be a list of things that you've done. A resume will be a summary of what you've done. So in a resume, you'll have sentences. In a CV, you won't. As Dorit said, and Diane, and I think Chris as well, if you're applying for a job, you may want to customize the document you send. That would be more consistent with a resume than it would be a CV. Okay, in a CV, you're just going to list all the degrees you had, the committees you're on, the organizations you're involved with, the honors that you've had, the papers that you've written. Okay, so you got an example of an academic CV from Barbara. Okay, my CV, which you probably haven't seen, is got a little bit of resume in it, and some people would criticize me for having the two blended a little bit. Again, you want to customize what you're doing to make it fit what you don't want to misrepresent yourself, but you want it to be consistent with the things that they're looking for as well. Your MPH is really valuable and really important. You heard Diane say she won't hire somebody without an MPH, okay? In many medical care systems, they will hire people without an MPH, but your MPH is definitely a step up, and you're much more likely to get hired because you have that MPH. So make sure that it's clearly noted in your, whether it's your CV or your resume, and talk about what, not only that you have an MPH, but that your degree is in healthcare leadership, global health leadership, and in administration. Those are important things. People will look at that. Okay, I want to talk briefly about how to get an interview. I think this varies a lot from country to country. Dorit, it was very interesting for me to hear Dorit describe how people are anonymous. That's really interesting and important. That is not the case in most places. And in some countries, and in some cultures, who you know is absolutely going to determine whether you get interviewed or not. In other countries, it isn't. It's much more of a meritocracy. It's much more just about the objective evidence of what you've done. So it's important to know what the culture is in the country that you are applying for the job in. And if you're expecting it to be based on the merit of your CV, and it's a country or a culture that's all about who you know, you're going to get frustrated. Okay, if it's a meritocratic process, which is to say, if it's based on the merit of your efforts, and you try to get a friend or a family member to speak on your behalf, you may get automatically rejected because they're offended by that attempted interference. So trying to understand is important. In almost all cultures, having a connection is worthwhile. And somebody can, as they say, and as we say in the US, put in a good word for you, okay? In other words, if you know somebody, they can call somebody and say, Kayla is applying for this job, Gabrielle is applying for this job. I know them very well, would you consider them? And even in countries where there's a meritocracy, that connection will just get you looked at, okay? You're likely not going to get the job based on who you know, but you might at least get the introduction that allows you to be seriously considered, okay? So, and don't be offended by that. Understand it. Some people get very upset. They say, I'm not going to ask my father or my cousin or Professor Green because I don't, I won't do that. No, it's part of a system of getting in. If you get an interview, be yourself. Okay, don't try to make yourself into something you aren't. Okay, because people will see that. I mean, you heard Chris Cook talk about interviewing, and you remember from my teaching you in the leadership course about meetings. When I hire someone, I try to just get them to talk. I try to make them comfortable. I put them in a comfortable chair. I try to be comfortable. And we don't necessarily even talk about the job. We'll just talk about whatever it is there is to talk about, because they'll get more comfortable. The more comfortable they are, the more disarming it is, and I can find out about them. And so be yourself. Don't misrepresent things. Don't try to be smart. Just say it like it is. If they ask you a question that's a tough question, be honest in answering it. You heard what Dorit said. If they ask you to talk about a weakness, be honest. We all have our weaknesses, and talk about it, okay? People will be impressed if you can be honest and kind of disarming about yourself. If you're applying for a job and you have an interview, you absolutely need to know that organization. I almost got a job working at NIH. It's a long story. And had I wouldn't be here. But I studied the strategic plan. This was the National Institute of Heart, Lung, and Blood. I had that strategic plan very well known to me. And when I sat down with the director, because it was a deputy director position of NHLBI, I knew that strategic plan better than she did, okay? And I talked about it, and I said, this is how my work would fit into that strategic plan. So I knew that organization. And you want to be able to know it, and you want to be able to ask a couple of good questions. It doesn't necessarily need to be about the strategy. It can be about any of many things. But you want them to see that you are interested enough in this job that you know the organization. Okay. What's the job like? Well, being an MPH, people will assume that you have certain skills. Okay, some of those skills will be knowledge-based skills like epidemiology, biostatistics. So you can get hired by an organization to do the quantitative work that nobody else can do, because a lot of people get hired into jobs with no quantitative skills at all. They don't understand epidemiology or biostatistics. research design. They can't read a paper, okay? So you have that skill. Many organizations will assume with an MPH that you have the ability to manage people. And in most organizations, for sure in the medical care system, whether it's in Europe or Israel or Asia or the United States, the two key things are your ability to manage people and your ability to manage money. And your ability to advance in a job, in a career, relates to your demonstration that you have managed money and managed people. And with an MPH, you will very commonly be put into, at the very beginning of your career, a management job. People will assume that with the MPH, you have the ability to manage money and people. And as you start, it may be managing 2 people. You know, it's a team of 3 and you're the boss, or it may be 5 people or 10 people. It's not going to be 300, okay? When Dorit was in Ukraine, I think she had, and Manfred, you can correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere around 300 or 400 employees who worked for her. Big job, big job. You don't get a job like that as you start, okay? But it is a management job, so you need to understand that. You're not going to get hired into a leadership job, okay? That comes later, okay? But the management is where you start. How much do you get paid? People in MPH in the medical care system is going to get paid more than an MPH working in the public health system. And in the US, and this is just an example, obviously, in the US, somewhere your starting salary would be between $35,000 and $50,000. And it's interesting, my calculation was about 15,000 shekels a month, which is what Diane said. So it kind of correlates. I think you could easily get paid more in the US and probably more in Western Europe than you would in Israel. Obviously those are entry level. In public health, people don't get paid huge amounts of money. As you know, you're not in the richest of professions, but your career will lead to a nice, successful, reasonable salary. The average that I saw in the US for a person with an MPH is $68,000, which is not a bad salary. It's not going to make you rich. Actually, the numbers were a little out of date, but that's what that is. Okay, so I've got 2 other quick things to say, and then I'll take questions, and then we'll be done because we're running longer than I planned for us to do. One of the questions that you address in hiring is, do you hire for position or do you hire for person? And I want to explain that to you. So sometimes somebody comes along. We'll take Daphne as an example, okay? Daphne was a student of ours last year. Manfred and I took a look and we said, we need to hire this person because she is so good. We've got to make sure that we do something to keep her, okay? And hopefully all of you agree with us about Daphne, and I'm picking on you, Daphne, but it makes the point. She was in the system, and I have, this is how I operate, for better and for worse. I find somebody I like, who I respect, who I'd like to work with, and I create a job for them. Now, you can argue that for Daphne, we had that position existed, okay? But we were really looking at her, and then we made this job more for her and her skills, okay? The alternative is you hire for a position. In other words, you create a position, and then people apply, and you take the best person amongst those people who apply, okay? And that's the typical, that's what you're supposed to do. Diane talked about that. Everybody else who spoke talked about how the position is created because that's more depersonalized, okay? That's the way, quote, it should be done. But if a really terrific person comes along and you don't want to lose them, then you can make a job, okay? And I've definitely done that, where I've said, okay, we don't have a job. Daphne, let's talk about your qualities, and we actually write up a job based on that one person. Now, why am I bringing this up? Well, you need to understand it. And someone who you're doing an internship with or volunteer work or whatever may look at you and say, you know, Kayla, you are exactly what we want. We're going to make a job for you. And then you have to decide whether that interests you or not. And do you want to go that route? Okay. Usually, I would submit if somebody is trying to create a job for you, it's usually a good deal. If you're comfortable in the organization and you like the person, okay, because then you can have a job that you really can create. Okay, so I'm just bringing that up because occasionally you'll be in a situation where someone looks at you and says, Gabby, I'm hiring you. We'll figure out what the job is later. Okay, and then one final point, and then a couple of minutes for questions, and then we're done. Final point is, even though we've had a speaker from the US, a speaker from international organizations, a speaker from Israel, okay, what I see are a lot of commonalities. I would submit there are more commonalities than there are differences in these jobs. I'm not going to summarize them, but hopefully you see that. Getting a job is getting a job, okay? And I, if anything, kind of reassured that that it's more similar than different. I can take a couple questions, and then Manfred, you may want to say something in response. Diane is still here. We need to finish up in about 5 minutes. Any questions from anybody? Manfred, you want to say something? Manfred, you're on
I
mute.
couldn't join you. It would be going from Zoom to Zoom. I just come off one, and then in an hour or so, I'm going back on another one. The one thing that just wanted to remind you, I think we've spoken about it. I think it's a great advantage if you come to an interview, or even when you send in stuff, that you can send them products, that you can send them stuff that you've done. So when you do your ILE, I would suggest really that or even some of the presentations you've given, don't think of it just as something to get a grade. You can keep that and use it. And I would personally know that I would be very impressed with somebody who comes to an interview and says, look, these are the things I've done. I can show you stuff that I've done. And so it's worth investing, because, you know, we always say you've done an ILE and we give you a grade, and then it goes into a file and nobody looks at it. And that's really a pity. I mean, because I know that a lot of the ones that have been done here are really good. And a lot of the presentations you give in the class, you know, you can say, look, this is the kind of presentation I've given in class. And this is a topic that's of interest to me. You'd be surprised. This is, you know, even now, Dorit probably didn't tell you, but Dorit is very good at doing presentations. So, I mean, she's always spent a lot of time, and she's very artistic. So even at her level, there are still people coming to her and saying, can you help me do a presentation? Because they know that she's, you know, she likes to do presentations. And that's an advantage. That, you know, you not only do you use that to get employed, but you get respect, you know, and a lot of respect from your co-workers. Spend some time I'm struggling hard with Excel, which I learned years ago, and now I'm working on my own, so I'm going back into it. So good to know Excel. Daphne sometimes helps me, but sometimes she probably raises her hands in despair and lets me just go on my own. But you know, these kind of things are very useful. You know how to produce good documents, you know, that look good and so on. These are really important assets. This is in addition to all the knowledge that you have, because when you work in an environment, people will want to have somebody who can do a lot of things. That, you know, it's not, you know, the best person in the company or is the one person who says they're prepared to do anything. And one example, the last one, I think, well, there've been a couple of them, but do you remember Chris Ronson, who was one of our students here a couple of years ago? And I met Chris when she worked for Dorit, and when she got to Dorit, she worked for her in Belgrade, I think, no, in Ukraine. She didn't have a master's at the time, she had a bachelor, but she came virtually as a volunteer and so on and so forth. And she joined Dorit's office to do some work, and she pretty much said to everybody, I can do anything. You want me to do something, I'll do it. And she became known, you know, so you want to solve a problem, get Chris and she'll do it. There was nothing that she wasn't prepared to do. And she now works, I mean, she's a consultant to WHO, and she's done very well. So, you know, this is, you build it, you build these bridges that way. Anyway, I think you've probably quite tired now, so I won't go on anymore. We'll be meeting again tomorrow, but these are,
Can I ask something
Gabby
quickly?
wanted to ask a question, yeah.
Yes. Do you think it's only appropriate to offer to show them your ILE or presentations once you get to an interview, or is there like a segue when you're applying to add
You know,
it somehow?
personally, if the person who's applying volunteers to send me stuff, you know, you don't overload. You say, look, you can ask. You can also say, I can send you an example of some of the things I've done and wait to hear what, or you can send something and say, look, this is the kind of thing that we've done, that I've done. I mean, when in an academic environment, what do we look at? We look at papers that people have published and research grants that they've prepared and so on. I mean, we look at products. We don't just interview them and listen to them. So, and this would be true. And you need to sell yourselves, and you shouldn't be embarrassed. You know, Professor Schuster's already said that you don't have to be embarrassed about that. You're actually promoting yourself. You should do that.
Yeah,
with a little humility, but okay, but
right.
not overdo it. But you know, recognize your weaknesses as well. But you know, but don't be afraid to say that. And don't be afraid to say that you're prepared to take on any challenge. I know that when I've employed people, particularly in the last job when I also had about 60 or 70 people, and I know that when I had to interview people, as soon as I got the person said, well, you know, that's not really my field, or I'm not really interested in doing that kind of thing. You kind of already say, wait a second, that's not exactly the person you want. You know, even though the person may just be saying it because they're honest, they're not interested in some of it. But that's not really the kind of impression you should make, I think, in anything. You pretty much are saying, I'm prepared to take on anything. Obviously, I'm more interested in some things, but I'm happy to help out wherever possible.
In ILE, excuse me, for your ILE, with a CV, you would list it. You would just name it, what you did. In a resume, you would name it and then put a sentence describing it. Okay. In both cases, they should be listed though, because that's a product, as Professor Green said. That's a product of your success, and you should feel proud of it. Be willing to talk about it. You know, at an interview, you want to be interesting, and you want to believe in yourself too. And Professor Green just said that. You definitely do. Diane, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just remember, thank you. I know you're all exhausted. This is like my 5th Zoom meeting today, but I'm enjoying hearing what you're saying. And it made me think that something I didn't mention is that in Israel, it might be also the case in the States and in Europe or international organizations, your first year of employment is usually a year, it's kind of a trial year. You wouldn't get a permanent position, or you wouldn't get tenure in your position right off. You would have to kind of prove yourself, and you would get re-evaluated after a year. And usually if your experience is positive, it's very smooth and they love you and they say, we want you to be a permanent employee. If it's, you know, an employer, if it's academia, it's a little bit more complicated. But you always have to remember that, you know, once you're hired, you still have to prove yourself. You still have to show what you said you could do, you have to do it. So, but I think that's really good because it gives you momentum and it gives you motivation, and you know, kind of live up to what you said, you know, who you are. So that's just, you know, another stage in all the hiring and employment aspects, at least in Israel. And I forgot to mention it, I apologize.
No, that's good. And actually, as a follow-up to that, when you get your first job or any job, as you start it, you should get some kind of a performance review. And some countries are going to be more clear about it. Some organizations clearer about it. If they don't, then you should ask your boss to sit down with you after 3 months or 6 months and give you feedback. Remember from the work of Aaron Meyer that we talked about in the leadership course, different cultures give different feedback. So you have to take the culture that you're in and interpret what they're saying to you, right? So if you're in England, they might say, well, we want you to be a bit improved. Well, a bit in England means that you're doing something wrong and they want to see it, okay? Whereas a bit improved in the US is, oh, you're great, you know, and just to make a couple little changes. So you want to put in context in the cultural context what that feedback is. But if at all possible, you want to make sure you get that feedback, because you want to know what they think of you, you want to know what they're bothered by, and you want to make the changes if you can to satisfy what they want. Because after a year, you want to stay there, or you want to be in control. Okay, I think we should probably stop. Is there one last question from anybody that's a hot question? Otherwise, we've run way over, and I apologize for that. But
I just want to give a little tip from my experience from going to job interview. I think a lot of interviewers really like it, like the tone that you use while being interviewed, the smile, the vibe, because they really want people who they feel comfortable with working with, and to, you know, be less negative as much as possible. That's it.
right, you have to believe in yourself and be positive. I agree. Okay, all right. With that, we're going to say goodbye. Diane, thank you so much. And
Good luck, everybody.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate the feedback from all of you, and it's nice to see you all. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.